Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The lights from the towering screens flickered, casting shadows over the crowded streets as political ads flooded the city. Every corner, every building, every piece of media was plastered with the faces of the presidential candidates. Smiling, confident, and full of promises they had no intention of keeping. John Prescott knew better. He had spent years behind the curtain, watching as these campaigns were orchestrated like well-rehearsed plays. The public cheered, voted, and felt a sense of control, but they were nothing more than pawns in a game much larger than they could ever imagine. John sat in the corner of a dimly lit cafe. Copyright, his fingers gripping a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. His eyes, once sharp and filled with purpose, now carried the weight of knowledge too heavy for one man to bear. He glanced at the screens above, where the latest candidate, Michael Conway, was giving a speech about freedom, justice, and change. John nearly scoffed aloud. He had personally watched Conway's entire campaign be crafted months ago by the shadow government as the real rulers of the nation. Freedom, justice, change, John muttered under his breath. What a load of crap. The truth was something the public could never fully understand. Every election, every candidate, and every vote was meticulously manipulated by an invisible hand. It had been that way for decades, long before John had joined the ranks of the shadow government. But now, after years of serving those who pulled the strings, he had seen enough. He was tired of watching democracy die behind closed doors. He thought of the last meeting he had attended, just before he left. The room had been dark, illuminated only by the glow of holographic displays showing the national poll numbers and voter analytics. The other members of the shadow government sat in silence, eyes fixed on the data as it scrolled across the screen. The man at the head of the table, known only as the chairman, spoke in a calm, measured voice. "We control everything," the chairman had said, his eyes never leaving the screen. "Every thought, every vote, every action. And as long as we maintain control, the public will continue to believe in the illusion." John had stared at the charts, his stomach turning. He had believed in their cause once, believed that this control was necessary to maintain order. But the truth had become clearer with every passing year. They weren't maintaining order, they were maintaining power. And John had finally had enough. Now, as he sat in the cafe copyright, watching the latest farce of an election unfold, he knew what he had to do. He wasn't content to sit idly by any longer. He would expose the truth, even if it meant tearing down the entire system. But how? The answer had come to him in a moment of clarity. He would run for president. Not as part of the system, but as an outsider, a defector from the very machine that controlled it all. He would infiltrate their ranks from within, use their own methods against them, and expose the truth to the public. He set his cup down, a sense of purpose beginning to stir within him once again. It wouldn't be easy. The shadow government would come after him, try to discredit him, silence him, maybe even kill him. But for the first time in years, John felt like he had a real chance to make a difference. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, encrypted phone. With a few taps, he sent a message to the only two people he could trust with his plan, Sarah Collins and Derek Young. 2 days later, John stood in a small, nondescript office that would serve as his campaign headquarters. It was far from the lavish, high-tech war rooms used by the other candidates, but it was all they could afford. He looked around at the sparse furniture and outdated computers, then glanced at Sarah and Derek, who stood beside him. Sarah was a former data analyst for one of the many consulting firms that worked for the shadow government. Her work had been instrumental in crafting the algorithms that manipulated voter behavior. But like John, she had grown disillusioned with the system and had left, disappearing off the grid for several years before John had tracked her down. Derek was a journalist, once respected and admired for his fearless reporting. That was until he had tried to expose the truth about election manipulation. His career had been destroyed in a matter of days, his reputation tarnished beyond repair. Now, he worked in the shadows, digging up dirt on the people who had ruined his life. "I still think this is insane," Sarah said, her arms crossed as she stared at John. "Do you really think we can win this?" John shook his head. "I don't care about winning. This isn't about becoming president. It's about exposing the truth." Derek nodded, though his expression remained skeptical. "You know they're going to come after us, right? They'll do everything they can to stop you. If they can rig the election, they can rig your entire life." "I know," John replied, his voice steady, "but I've spent too long in the shadows. It's time to fight back." Sarah sighed and glanced at Derek. "We're going to need more than just good intentions. We need a strategy, a way to get your message out without getting buried." John smiled. "That's where you two come in. You know how they operate. You've seen their playbook. We use that against them." Derek leaned back against the wall, rubbing his chin. "It's risky, but I'll admit, if anyone can do it, it's you." They spent the next few hours mapping out their plan. Sarah would use her knowledge of the algorithms to work on countering the manipulation tactics used by the shadow government. Derek would reach out to his contacts in the underground media, people who weren't afraid to report the truth. And John would focus on building his platform, gaining the trust of the public without revealing too much too soon. As the weeks passed, John's campaign slowly gained momentum. At first, the media ignored him, dismissing him as another fringe candidate with no chance of winning. But as his message began to resonate with the disillusioned voters and those who had long suspected that the system was rigged, his popularity started to grow. It wasn't long before the shadow government took notice. One evening, as John was preparing for a rally in a small town, he received a call from a blocked number. He hesitated for a moment, then answered. "John Prescott," a familiar voice said on the other end. It was the chairman. John's grip tightened on the phone. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you." "You're making a mistake," the chairman said, his voice calm and measured. "As always, you know how this ends. You can't win, John. We control everything. You'll be lucky if you make it out of this alive." John's heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. "I'm not trying to win, I'm trying to stop you." The chairman chuckled softly. "You've always been naive. Do you really think the people will believe you? We control the media, the polls, even their thoughts. You're fighting a battle you can't win." "Maybe," John replied, his voice steady, "but I'd rather die fighting than live as your puppet." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, the chairman spoke again, his tone darker this time. "You've been warned." The line went dead. John stared at the phone for a moment, his mind racing. He had expected this. The shadow government wouldn't let him continue without a fight. But he hadn't expected them to confront him so directly, so soon. He glanced at Sarah and Derek, who had been watching him from across the room. "It's starting," he said quietly. As John's campaign gained more traction, the shadow government ramped up its efforts to stop him. The media began running hit pieces on him, questioning his sanity, digging into his past to find anything they could use against him. Polls were mysteriously altered, showing a sudden drop in his support. Social media platforms started censoring his posts, labeling them as misinformation. But despite their efforts, John's message continued to spread. More and more people began to see through the lies, to question the system that had controlled them for so long. Yet, the shadow government was relentless. One evening, just days before a crucial debate, John's phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Sarah, marked urgent. "Meet me, now." John raced through the dimly lit streets, his breath coming in quick bursts as he made his way to the meeting spot. He hadn't heard this level of urgency from Sarah since the start of the campaign, and that alone told him something had gone terribly wrong. His mind buzzed with possibility as was it another attack on their credibility? Had someone been compromised? He rounded the corner to the secluded alley where Sarah had told him to meet her. She stood there, her face pale, her hands trembling as she clutched a tablet to her chest. "They found us, John," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the distant hum of the city. "I thought I had hidden our tracks, but I was wrong. They're onto USA, onto everything." John's stomach twisted. "What do you mean? What exactly did you find?" Sarah thrust the tablet into his hands, her eyes wide with fear. "I was digging into their algorithms, trying to reverse engineer the election rigging, and I found a backdoor. It's a kill switch. They can shut down the entire election process if they sense they're losing control." John scrolled through the data displayed on the screen, his heart sinking with every passing moment. Sarah was right. The shadow government had built in a contingency plan, a way to completely bypass the voting system, rendering any potential disruption from an outsider like John null and void. If they activated this kill switch, the election would be over before it even started. The public wouldn't even know it had been rigged. "They're planning to use this against us," John muttered, more to himself than to Sarah. "If I gain any more traction, they'll pull the plug." Sarah nodded, her expression grim. "We don't have much time. Once they activate this, it's over." "But there's more." John looked up, his chest tightening. "More? They're not just stopping the election," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "They're going to frame you. They're setting you up as a traitor, as someone trying to destabilize the country. They've already planted evidence linking you to foreign agents. By the time this is over, you won't just lose the election, you'll be arrested. Or worse." John clenched his fists, his mind racing through the possibilities. He had known the risks when he started this campaign, but the reality of it all was crushing. The shadow government would stop at nothing to maintain control. And now, they were coming for him harder and faster than he had anticipated. But he wasn't going to back down. "Not now." "Then we hit back," John said, his voice filled with determination. "We expose the kill switch. We show the world what they're planning." Sarah shook her head. "It's not that simple. The moment we try to release this information, they'll discredit us. They control the media. They control the narrative." "Not all of it," a voice said from the shadows. John and Sarah both turned to see Derek step out from the darkness, his face grim but resolute. He had been following them for most of the campaign, digging into leads and quietly gathering intel from sources who had fallen off the radar of the mainstream press. "I have contacted some people who can get the word out," Derek continued. "It won't be easy, and it won't be safe, but if we can get this information to them, it'll at least give us a fighting chance." John felt a glimmer of hope. It was slim, but it was something. "Then we do it," he said, his voice firm. "We get this out before they can shut us down." Sarah hesitated. "Are you sure, John? This could be the end of everything." John's gaze hardened. "If we don't do this, they win. And if they win, everything we've worked for is gone. I'd rather go down fighting." The next morning, John stood before a packed audience at his latest rally, the weight of the previous night's revelations heavy on his mind. The crowd had grown larger with each appearance, a reflection of the growing frustration and anger among voters who felt the system was failing them. They cheered as he stepped onto the stage, but John couldn't shake the feeling that this was the calm before the storm. He glanced out at the sea of faces, knowing that within hours, the shadow government would make their move. He had Derek working on getting the information about the kill switch to his contacts, but even if they succeeded, it was unclear whether the truth would reach enough people in time. And even if it did, there was no telling how the public would react. The system had been in place for so long, so deeply ingrained in the national consciousness, that the idea of it all being a lie might be too much for them to accept. John took a deep breath and began his speech, speaking with passion and conviction, just as he always did. But as the words left his mouth, he couldn't help but notice the uneasy stirring in the crowd. People were checking their phones, whispering to each other, looking confused. Something was happening. His heart sank as he realized what it was. The shadow government was making their move. Just then, His own phone buzzed in his pocket. He discreetly glanced at the screen and saw a message from Derek. "They've done it. Meteor blackout on us. We're being discredited as we speak." John swallowed hard, forcing himself to keep his composure. He continued his speech, even as his mind raced. The media blackout meant that any attempt to spread the truth would be suppressed. The kill switch was imminent, and now they were being painted as villains, conspirators against the nation. It was all falling apart. But then, something unexpected happened. A voice from the crowd shouted, "We believe you, John." John froze, his eyes scanning the audience. A young woman stood near the front, holding up her phone, showing him the live feed from an independent news outlet that had managed to slip through the blackout. The headline read, "Shadow Government Exposed, a Kill Switch Discovered." The crowd erupted into murmurs of disbelief, shock, and anger. More phones came out, more people reading the same news. Somehow, against all odds, the truth had started to leak out. Derek's contacts had succeeded. John seized the moment. "You see that?" he shouted, his voice booming across the rally. "The truth is out. They've been lying to you for decades. They've manipulated every election, controlled every candidate, and now they're trying to silence us because they're afraid. They're afraid of what happens when the people take back control." The crowd roared in response, their energy shifting from confusion to fury. John could feel the momentum building, but he knew it wasn't over yet. The shadow government wouldn't go down without a fight. Later that evening, John, Sarah, and Derek huddled in their makeshift headquarters, watching as the media war unfolded in real time. Independent outlets were picking up the story, but mainstream channels were still trying to bury it. The shadow government was working overtime to contain the fallout, using every resource at their disposal to discredit John and his team. But the tide was turning. "We're not out of the woods yet," Derek warned. "They'll come after us harder now." John nodded. "I know. But this is our chance. We need to keep pushing. We need to make sure the truth reaches everyone." Sarah, who had been quiet for most of the night, suddenly spoke up. "There's one more thing we can do." John and Derek turned to her, waiting. "I can disable the kill switch." John's eyes widened. "How?" Sarah looked down at her tablet, her fingers tapping rapidly on the screen. "I've been studying the back door. If I can hack into their system, I can shut it down before they have a chance to use it. But it's risky. They'll know it's me, and if they catch me, we're all done for." John's mind raced. This was the final piece. If Sarah could disable the kill switch, they could level the playing field. But it was dangerous, more dangerous than anything they had done so far. "Do it," John said finally, his voice resolute. "We don't have a choice." The hours that followed were a blur of tension and adrenaline. Sarah worked furiously on her tablet, her fingers moving faster than John had ever seen. Derek kept watch, monitoring the media and ensuring their story continued to spread. John paced the room, his mind focused on the task at hand. This was it, their final stand. Then, just before dawn, Sarah let out a shaky breath and looked up. "It's done." John's heart pounded in his chest. "You're sure?" Sarah nodded, a small smile creeping onto her face. "They won't be able to use the kill switch." "Not this time." A wave of relief washed over John, but it was quickly followed by the realization that their fight was far from over. The shadow government was still out there, still powerful, and still determined to crush them. But for the first time in years, John felt hope. Real hope. "We did it," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. Derek clapped him on the back. "It's not over yet, but we've got a fighting chance now." John smiled, a flicker of determination burning in his eyes. "Then let's finish this."